What if the biggest bully in school picked the wrong person to mess with? He had always intimidated everyone around him, used fear to control the school, and never found anyone who dared to challenge him. Until now. Maya Stone is the new student at Brookwood High, and all she wants is to go unnoticed. But when the bully, Bryce Holden, decides to make her his next target, something unexpected happens. He pushes her, tries to humiliate her, does everything he can to break her. But Maya doesn't react like the others. She doesn't feel fear. She doesn't play his game. And when a black Aston Martin pulls into the school parking lot and the windows roll down, revealing none other than Jason Statham, Bryce realizes he may have made the biggest mistake of his life. But this story is far from over. The real showdown between Maya and Bryce won't be decided with fists or shouting, but with something far more powerful. Get ready for a story full of suspense, twists, and an unforgettable lesson about on who really holds the power. If you've ever been through something similar, or know someone who has faced a bully, leave a comment below. Don't forget to like the video to support the channel and subscribe, turning on notifications so you don't miss any more thrilling stories like this. Maya Stone arrived early that day, as she always did at every new school she was transferred to. The morning air was crisp, and the sky carried the pale tone of the sun that had not yet fully risen on the horizon. The parking lot of Brookwood High was almost full, with cars coming and going as students gathered in groups that seemed to have been formed since childhood. She pulled the strap of her backpack higher on her shoulder and walked through the main gate without haste, absorbing the environment around her. She scanned the unfamiliar faces, the couples leaning against lockers, the cheerleaders laughing loudly at something only they understood, the football players moving in packs. It wasn't much different from the other schools she had attended. Inside the school, the contrast between vibrant colors and neutral tones was striking. The blue lockers lined the long hallways, while the polished floor reflected the beams of light coming through the side windows. The familiar scent of paper, ink, and cheap cafeteria coffee lingered in the air. For most students, it was just another routine day, but for her, it was the first day of a new game. As she reached her locker, she noticed occasional curious glances from some students. A new girl always attracted attention, even if she didn't want to. However, Maya didn't care. Avoiding prolonged eye contact and unnecessary interactions was something she did naturally. But her peace didn't last long. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A light shove on her shoulder, followed by the sound of her books falling to the ground. The noise echoed through the hallway, drawing the attention of those nearby. Time seemed to slow down for a moment as Maya looked at the scattered papers around her feet. Laughter followed shortly after, sharp and taunting, coming from a group of boys leaning against the lockers ahead. The one at the center of the group, with a satisfied smirk, was Bryce Holden. He was taller than most, with an athletic build and an air of exaggerated confidence. His football team jacket was casually draped over his shoulders, and his gaze carried that superiority that came from years of being treated as someone who always won. The students around them paused their conversations to watch, waiting for her reaction. Most already knew what was coming next. Newcomers always reacted the same way when Bryce decided to test their resilience. Some confronted him, trying to fight back, only to end up humiliated at some point. Others just lowered their heads and accepted their role as a target, but Maya did neither. She slowly crouched down, picking up her books one by one, showing no hurry or hesitation. Her hands moved with precision, calmly stacking the notebooks. The silence around them grew heavier, as if everyone was holding their breath, expecting some kind of outburst. But none came. When she finally stood up, she cast a quick glance at Bryce but didn't linger for more than a second before turning away and continuing on her path. No words, no prolonged eye contact, no reaction that would give him the satisfaction of a confrontation. The laughter from Bryce's group gradually faded. He frowned, clearly unsettled. Something about her reaction disarmed him for a moment. He was used to people either fighting back or showing fear. But that girl simply ignored him, as if he was nothing more than an irrelevant obstacle in her way. For the rest of the day, Maya noticed that Bryce kept looking at her in the hallways. His eyes followed her steps, analyzing her movements, trying to figure out who she was, and why her reaction wasn't what he expected. The tension escalated at the end of the day. The afternoon sun had already begun dipping toward the horizon as Maya walked through the school parking lot toward the bus stop. The heat trapped in the asphalt rose into the air, making everything around feel a bit more suffocating. Students left in groups, some laughing, others glued to their phones, while the last few football players remained on the field, finishing their practice. She noticed when Bryce and two of his friends started following her. Their pace wasn't fast, but there was a clear intention in how they approached. They were waiting for a moment when there wouldn't be too many witnesses. Maya kept walking at the same steady pace, showing no sign of nervousness. She had been in situations like this before. The footsteps behind her grew closer. The sound of sneakers against the concrete mixed with the distant murmur of the school. Her instincts told her they were about to make a move. That was when the roar of an engine echoed through the air. The deep, powerful sound made Bryce and his friends stop abruptly. The nearby students also turned their attention toward the road. A black Aston Martin Vantage appeared at the end of the street, smoothly gliding over the asphalt before pulling up along the curb. The engine still vibrated slightly, like a fierce animal waiting for its next command. The windows were completely tinted. The car's flawless shine reflected the golden hues of the setting sun, mirroring the surroundings like a polished mirror. For a moment, everything fell silent. Then the driver's window rolled down slowly. The first thing visible was a hand resting on the steering wheel, fingers firm, veins subtly marked by restrained strength. Then, the face came into view. Jason Statham, with his always serious expression, cast a direct look at the small group of boys who had gotten too close to Maya. His eyes didn't show anger or impatience. It was a cold, calculated look, the kind that didn't need words to be understood. Bryce didn't move. As much as he tried to maintain his confident posture, his shoulders tensed slightly. The atmosphere around them shifted completely. The boy knew how to recognize when someone wasn't just for show. Without hesitation, Maya opened the car door and got in. The silence lingered as the engine roared again, and the Aston Martin smoothly pulled away from the parking lot, leaving behind a group still trying to process what had just happened. No matter how much Bryce tried to hide it, it was visible to anyone paying attention. He was uncomfortable. For the first time in a long while, he had felt something unfamiliar. He didn't know exactly what it was, but one thing was certain. He had messed with the wrong person. In the following days, Bryce refused to accept what had happened. Ever since that black Aston Martin appeared in the parking lot, something inside him had started to unravel. He had never felt this before. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something deeper, more unsettling. It was the realization that for the first time he was not in control of the situation. He tried to ignore the unease, focusing on what had always worked before. He knew how to break people, how to make them acknowledge his dominance. So he did what he did best. He pushed, pressured, and tested limits. The next morning, Maya found her locker in complete disarray. The books that had been neatly organized were now scattered across the floor, some pages crumpled, others torn. Marker scribbles covered the metal door, insults hastily written, as if whoever had done it wanted to ensure they were seen before they could be erased. But Maya did not react as expected. She observed the mess for a few seconds, tilting her head slightly. Then, without showing any sign of urgency or anger, she crouched down and began picking up her belongings. Each movement was calm, almost methodical. As she restacked her books, she noticed a few students watching. Some whispered to each other, exchanging glances, waiting to see an explosion of fury or frustration. But she didn't give them that spectacle. Bryce was among those watching. Leaning against the hallway wall, arms crossed, jaw clenched, he waited for any sign of weakness. But what he saw was the opposite. Maya closed the locker door with a soft click, slung her backpack over her shoulders, and walked away without ever looking directly at him. That irritated him more than any direct confrontation would have. In the following days, he became more persistent. Every time Maya passed him in the hallway, something happened. Someone would bump into her deliberately hard enough to make her momentarily lose balance. A notebook would disappear from her bag, only to reappear later with useless scribbles covering her notes. The food she left on the table for a moment would be knocked over, accidentally, according to the smug smiles of those responsible. But the reaction he craved never came. Every time Maya encountered an obstacle, she moved around it. Every provocation she ignored. Every trap she avoided with the same unsettling calm. And then, something began to change. The students around them started to notice what was happening. They saw how Bryce insisted, how he seemed increasingly desperate to get a response from her. But what no one could deny was that with each new attempt, it was Bryce who seemed to be losing control. The weight of his authority was no longer the same. Some of the laughter around him started sounding more nervous than genuine. Even his own friends no longer seemed so confident at his side. And then, something began to change, but Bryce didn't see it. He was blinded by the need to reclaim what he felt was slipping through his fingers. And then he decided he needed to do something bigger, something definitive. It was during lunch that he saw his opportunity. And then, something began to change. The cafeteria was crowded, as noisy as always. Trays clattered against tables, conversations blended with the metallic sound of utensils. At the center of the room, Bryce sat with his usual group. His spot was an invisible throne, strategically positioned so that everyone had to pass by him at some point. And that's exactly what happened when Maya walked in. She moved through the space with the same posture as always, confident, unshaken. She wasn't looking for confrontation, wasn't seeking eye contact. She was simply crossing the cafeteria with the intention of sitting down and eating, like any other day. But Bryce wasn't going to let that happen. He leaned slightly forward, raising his voice just enough to make sure his words reached everyone around. He made a comment suggesting that Maya only acted this way because she had someone powerful protecting her, that without her rich and famous daddy, she would be just like everyone else he had broken before. The remark spread through the room like a spark on gasoline. The noise of conversations around them gradually faded. Slowly, heads turned in her direction. He expected laughter to follow, but they didn't. Instead, what settled over the room was a strange, heavy silence. Maya didn't react immediately. She remained still, holding her tray, eyes fixed on Bryce. Her posture didn't change. Her expression remained neutral. But there was something in the way she looked at him that, for the first time, made Bryce feel real discomfort. The unease grew. The silence stretched. And then, without changing her stance, without even altering the tone of her voice, she said something. There was no sarcasm, no hatred, no exaggeration. Just a simple statement, spoken so naturally that it became impossible to ignore. The effect was immediate. The laughter Bryce had expected never came. His friends exchanged uncertain glances. Some looked away. Others fiddled with their trays as if they had just realized they no longer wanted to be there. The discomfort was no longer just his. Bryce felt something he had never felt before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It wasn't the satisfaction of humiliating someone else. It was the panic of realizing that for the first time, he might have said too much. He might have exposed himself. And worst of all, he might have lost control. The next morning, the atmosphere at Brookwood High felt different. From the moment Bryce Holden walked through the school gates, he sensed that something was off. The usual buzz in the hallways wasn't the same. The whispers seemed more intense. Eyes quickly turned away as he passed. Some students murmured among themselves. Others held their phones, scrolling intently as if reading something of extreme importance. There was something in the air, something he couldn't quite define, but it tightened his stomach. He didn't like this feeling. He didn't like not knowing what was happening. He walked toward his locker with firm steps, trying to ignore the growing unease. But when he turned the last corner, everything around him seemed to slow down. His locker was covered in printed sheets. And they weren't just random papers, they were proof. Screenshots of private conversations, messages sent in moments he never imagined would come to light. There, in black and white, his worst comments were exposed, his cruelest words laid bare. Insults directed at people who were now standing there, reading everything. Malicious jokes about the friends who, until yesterday, laughed by his side. Arrogant remarks about teachers. Sentences dripping with prejudice. Things he always thought would remain buried in the messages he sent without a second thought. The entire hallway was frozen, students forming a semicircle around the scene. Some stifled laughter, others murmured in shock. Many just watched in silence, waiting for his reaction. Bryce's blood turned cold. For a moment, he was completely still, as if his body refused to react. His mind raced, trying to understand how this had happened. Who had done this? Who had accessed his conversations? How had someone gathered all this evidence against him without him realizing it? But the questions didn't matter, because the damage was already done. His eyes scanned the faces around him. He saw the football players, the same ones who always followed him without question. Now, however, they looked different. Some seemed embarrassed, others kept their expressions blank as if they wanted to pretend they didn't know him. He ripped the first paper from his locker, crumpling it in his fist. But there were still more, taped up, visible for anyone who wanted to see. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his breathing heavy with frustration and panic. He tried to tear down more papers, but it was too late. Everyone had already read them. Bryce felt something he had never felt before, something deep and cutting, the sensation of being alone. His gaze continued scanning the hallway until it locked onto a pair of eyes fixed on him, watching from a distance. Maya was there. She wasn't smiling. She didn't display any satisfaction. She just observed, as if she had known all along that this moment would come. There was something in her expression that unsettled him even more than the stares of the other students. She didn't need to say anything. Bryce felt a lump tighten in his throat. He wanted to yell, to do something, anything to restore order. But there was no more control. The power he had always held over the school had evaporated before his eyes. He tried to turn away, to get out of there as fast as possible, but he could still feel the eyes burning into his back. Each step he took felt heavier than the last. The murmurs in the background grew, some laughing quietly, others just whispering. Throughout the day, he felt everything around him crumble. In history class, his friends avoided sitting near him. During lunch, the table where he always sat seemed to have become an empty space, as others discreetly found different seats. In gym class, the coach pulled him aside and stared at him for a few seconds before saying, without needing many words, that he expected better from him. That was it. There was no more throne, no more rain. What ate away at him the most wasn't the exposure of the messages. It wasn't the fact that everyone now knew who he really was. What hurt, what truly tore him apart, was the certainty that he no longer had anyone. At the end of the day, Bryce walked to the school parking lot, feeling a weight on his shoulders he had never carried before. He had never been the one people avoided. He had never been the one others looked at with disdain. Then he heard the deep rumble of a familiar engine. Slowly, he turned to see the black Aston Martin parked by the curb. The flawless paint reflected the evening light. The dark windows rolled down smoothly, revealing Jason Statham behind the wheel. The man's eyes were calm, but there was an intensity in them, a certainty, as if he had known exactly how this would end from the beginning. Maya got into the car without hesitation. As soon as the door shut, the engine roared again and the vehicle smoothly pulled away, leaving Bryce behind, alone in the middle of the parking lot. Jason didn't need to say anything. The message was clear. Maya didn't have to lift a finger. She didn't have to yell, didn't have to fight back physically. She just waited. Because true power isn't in brute strength, fear, or intimidation. True power belongs to those who know the right moment to act. This story teaches us that those who use cruelty to stay on top always end up falling. Because true respect is not imposed through fear, but earned through strength of character. And what about you? Have you ever experienced something similar? Have you ever seen a bully lose control when they realized they weren't as powerful as they thought? Share your story in the comments. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to like the video to support the channel and subscribe, turning on notifications so you don't miss any more thrilling stories like this.